You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
Every day, on every street, in every city, women are insulted, abused, threatened.
Nana, what's the matter?
What's the matter with you?
Are you planning on going with someone? Would you like to go with me?
Much too beautiful to be a model.
What's her secret? What is she hiding? Where is she going?
And Ferrara himself also points out that he was basically doing a guerrilla style of filmmaking throughout. I know Driller Killer, Miss 45, and then The Addiction, at least. So I'm presuming like every film he's made in New York, he's shooting without permits, without actors. He's just documenting life as it's actually happening in the city. So I also, like you're saying, I think I like knowing that Editor Sherman is another person who's part of the fabric.
Yeah,
of that landscape.
totally. So at work, Thana dissociates while pressing a silk shirt, been there, and burns it. And, her boss asks if she's okay. He's addressing her as honey. Heller Nicholas notes that the people around Thana are constantly demanding to know whether she is okay or not, placing discursive limits on her response. So, next kill. A man is harassing women on the sidewalk. Sighting Thana, he follows her down the street. Thana disposes of another bag of body parts on the sidewalk, and he runs after her, trying to give it back to her. Men are so useless. He's like, lady, you dropped your bag. Yeah.
Hey, baby.
Yeah.
He's like calling her baby. Like, oh, yeah, I'm totally going to run around for that.
Yeah, like, oh, are you talking to me? And
am I your baby now?
Panicked by being chased, she guns him down in an alleyway, and that serves you right for being annoying. And Thana returns home and vomits, and her landlady harasses her about her well-being, and Thana has nightmares. So she's really falling apart. And the kills, it's not like a joyful thing. Like, I feel like in some other movies like Thriller or I Spit on Your Grave, the woman is like very happy to be killing. And Thana it's a difficult thing for her. Like, she vomits. She's very shaken up afterwards.
This murder is not premeditated. This is her automatic hair trigger, literally and figuratively, response to a man chasing her. So even she is shocked by what she's done.
Right.
I mean, the intention is partly there because she's carrying a 45 around in her purse, but it's clear that from her reaction, she may not have even realized that she was capable of murder.
Yeah. So this is when this becomes kind of a sea change. So the next morning, a drunk man on the street finds a body part in the trash. Thanos' latest murder is in the papers. It's like, bizarre 45 killings. Albert lectures Thana in his office, telling her that she must try harder due to her disability. He touches her suggestively. He's such a creep. He suggests, right, and he's like insistent that she go to the company Halloween party. And
like, first of all, that's bad enough.
Right.
Being forced to go to a holiday party at the company is bad enough. On top of that, actually harassing her.
And she just writes it back in a written note, I'll try. And then to her coworker who inquires what's wrong, she writes a note that simply says, I wish they would leave me alone. She just wants to be left alone. I can relate to that. She is wearing red after this killing. So it's the first time that she's worn a bold color and also this really cute beret. And, you know, of course, there's all these themes of ableism here. And with wanting to just be left alone, her coworker responds with an expression of sympathetic resignation, but like she understands, but that's just how it is.
Right, yeah.
And Heller Nicholas notes that this coworker's question is open-ended, not like, are you okay or not, allowing Thana agency in a way others have not. I mean, it's kind of the first time somebody expresses genuine concern that isn't stifling.
Right. They're not demanding that the answer be yes. They're not even expressing distress. The landlady and Thana's boss are both clearly perturbed by how much of a wreck Thana is, but not because they care about her. The landlady wants to get paid.
Yeah, it's like inconvenient.
And the boss just, wants her to be able to keep pressing shirts. So.
And for him to keep being able to harass her.
It's so gross.
I hate him. Thana and her coworkers go out to lunch. This is an interesting scene because we see a little bit more about Lori, Thana's coworker. And a man and a woman are making out at the booth over at this diner. And Thana's coworker, who very much, Lori, and she's got this kind of masculine name too. Like, I believe Lori is the name of one of the boys in Little Women.
Yeah.
Right. And she fits like Carol Clover's conception of the final girl, which is this like masculine tomboy figure. And she expresses disgust and she gets into an argument with the man because he tries to hit on them at their table. And she's like, get the fuck out of here, like immediately. Yeah. And Thana, perhaps plotting her next murder. This is when it starts to become intentional, right? Mm-hmm. Thana lingers behind and the man hits on her. And it's so funny because he's like monologuing at her and doesn't notice that he doesn't notice that she doesn't speak once. Which is very funny, and he's just a typical sleazebag. Yeah, it's really realistic. He's like he's like one of those guys. It's like, wow, we're really connecting, and it's like I haven't not spoken one time.
Yeah.
So he introduces himself as this photographer, and he like sleazily is like, hey, want to come back to my apartment? We'll have a joint, we'll have some wine, we'll listen to music, like under the pretense of getting her this modeling career, but he's obviously like planning to date rape her. And instead of killing him on a hair trigger, she kills him confidently. And then applies makeup for the first time in the film. Like there's this long shot of her applying red lipstick and the music is like, I also love the music in this movie.
Oh god, yes.
So the photographer also refers to Lori as Thana's sister, which becomes important at the end of the film. She's not supposed to be her literal sister, right?
No, he is either just making shit up because he just thinks how he perceives the world immediately is unquestionable because he's that arrogant.
Or it's like a nod to like feminism, like making fun of feminism.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I was reading it. There's also this, just to talk a little bit about the filmmaking, the way that they're filming this guerrilla style on the streets of New York. is really, it's just like a cool historical moment in
Absolutely, yeah.
this movie. You can tell it's just guerrilla style. Like it's not this posed, closed off set, which I love.
It's not sanitized at all.
Yeah, exactly. So Thana dresses up in this dark blue silk blazer. I knew that I could count on you as a fellow femme to document these outfits.
I just stopped myself from like going too in depth into the style.
Yeah,
because
the style is so
how she
good.
looks.
Yeah, she's got this dark blue silk blazer, skirt, and heels, and she's in this full face of makeup, including the red lipstick. She stashes her 45 in a black leather bag and picks up a tote full of body parts. What a look. And she walks confidently out of her apartment and she hands a note to her landlady saying that she's going out. And the landlady is like, "Where? Going where? Where are you going all dressed up? I've never seen you like this." And she just ignores her. And she leaves the body parts in a locker at the Port Authority and discards the keys.
And like a cigarette in like an ashtray.
Yes. Do you want to talk a little bit about her visual transformation?
First of all, she looks fucking amazing.
Yes.
Definitely take a lot of my personal style cues from this scene. And this is a marked contrast from how she's depicted in the beginning of the film. Like at the beginning of the film, as a viewer, you see clearly how young she looks. She looks very fragile almost, unsure of herself, very vulnerable. And in this scene, she is transforming into this kind of film noir femme fatale. There is a little bit of a visual linkage, I think, to how she appears in the very first scene of the film because she's wearing a crepe silk blazer in this scene, which is very similar to the black one that she was wearing in the first scene. So there's this careful attention being paid to the continuities of Thana's style evolution. She also shocks her landlady, like you were saying. Her landlady is freaking out that Thana all of a sudden looks so sexy. And to the viewer, too, it's a total gear change. So you as a viewer, I think, are at the very least, I don't know how to put this. I don't know what the right word is. As the viewer,
Horny.
you're kind of stunned by this transfer. Wait, what?
I said horny.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're stunned. Like it's a better word for it.
Look, all I want is a goth woman to kill me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Is that so much to ask for? And yeah, the makeover, it's like it's such a trope in the revenge movie. Like some of the ones we listed here: Lady Vengeance, Lady Snowblood, Carrie, Miss 45, obviously, Thriller, Foxy Brown, Jennifer's Body, I Spit on Your Grave. It's like they get more beautiful once they stand in the truth of revenge. And it's almost like a subversion of the Medusa trope. So the rape survivor historically is like this monstrous figure, right? Like the myth of Medusa is where a lot of this comes from. Medusa is raped and then she becomes this monster, the Gorgon, who is this woman with snakes for hair that looks at you and you turn to stone if you catch her glance. So it's that is a very enduring trope in art of the rape survivor as monster. And of course this ties into, what we're doing over in my server with our screenings. We're watching monster women films for October and November. And this ties very much into the rape revenge film is a kind of monster woman film because there's this avenging Medusa figure. And then, of course, also her name means death. She's this angel of death. And then you have a note here that says the various ways the figure is portrayed in decadent and symbolist art and literature, which I would love to hear about.
Sure. So most of my knowledge of how feminized depictions or like female anthropomorphizations of death appear in late 19th century European art and literature is from a book called Idols of Perversity by Bram Dijkstra, if that's how you say it. Apologies if not.
Dykstra,
But
maybe?
yeah, he in this book points out several examples of death being portrayed as this alluring but ultimately destructive figure of a beautiful woman, which of course harkens back to the idea of Eve. He also points out that many of these figures, even if they're not necessarily death, they are woman as sin, woman as death, being portrayed with animals, snakes, big cats, with prominent fangs, often near hip level, which is another harkening back to the vagina dentata. That was just so striking to me when I see Thana in this beautiful, long, dark silhouette walking so confidently and silently. She, to me, literally looks like a harbinger of doom, and she's very seductive as she does it.
Yeah, and her lipstick is this like vampiric succubus kind of reference. I mean, I feel like all female monsters in horror cinema, and I would consider this a horror film, can go back to the idea of the Medusa or the succubus or the vampire, which of course Barbara Creed talks about at length in The Monstrous Feminine and then in her follow-up as well. And this idea of the angel of death as seductive, I mean, this is like so, relevant to a lot of the work that I do. I just wrote an essay for a Blu-ray release about like the Bataillon death drive and death as like a seductive and erotic experience. And isn't that just the essence of goth and of like sadomasochism? Yeah, it's,
You can't
so
have
many.
Thanatos without Eros. You
Exactly.
can't have the fear of death without, the pleasure of a very horny life.
Yes, it's so true. It's so true. I was like talking to somebody about throwing my own play parties, and one of the reasons I wanted to do that is because music at play parties is usually really bad. And I was saying to my friend, like, I don't want to hear like the Nightmare Before Christmas soundtrack, which actually did happen to me at a play party.
Oh my God, dude, what a boner killer.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to hear, the way I worded it is like, I want to hear a German woman that's been on heroin for 20 years droning like, put a knife in me, fuck me with the knife. Like, that's what I want to hear. But that's what that kind of music gets at, is like the relationship between sexual ecstasy and death, which it's, this isn't obviously like not an erotic film, but there are nods of that here, like you talked about. So Thana kills a pimp for beating up a sex worker. Both the pimp and the sex worker are black. And I feel like this is a really regressive trope that gets used in other rape revenge films, like in Rape Squad, which we watched also as part of our mini theme. Just as an aside, we are watching rape revenge movies on my server. If you sign up for my highest tiers, the Murder Mommy or the Blood Countess tiers, sign up today. Patreon.com/GirlsGutsJella. And we watched this. We watched Rape Squad, and that's the thing that happens in that movie too. And it's almost, we don't see black women a lot in rape revenge movies except during like scenes like this. In Rape Squad, it's a bit different because one of the main characters is a black woman, and she is also a garment worker, like Thana. And part of why that scene occurs is to highlight the solidarity that the black survivor feels with the sex worker. So it's a little like less regressive, but in this one, I'm like, it's very like, oh, look at this crazy den of iniquity sort of pre-Giuliani, specter of the black pimp moment.
I had the same thought watching this film. It feels, yeah, like you said, with Rape Squad, there's a moment of solidarity. In this film, it feels both that it is raising this myth that intra community violence for Black people is the biggest problem and
Right.
not in a white supremacist society. And the fact that this is the only Black woman in the film with a speaking role, I think it feels like a cheap shot, and I think it really glosses over the way that race also inflects people's experience of sexual violence.
At the same time, is it almost a nod to how Thana is becoming out of control? Because the sex worker is not like happy that this happens. Whereas in Rape Squad, she's like, yeah, kill him. Like it's in this one, she's like horrified. And if you think about it, it's not that simple for her. Like her abuser who's controlling her is also like probably responsible for her housing and income. And like there's a reason women turn to pimps, because there is that element of protection from violent clients. So, to God kill me, to play devil's advocate, like maybe it is also a nod to the way that she's becoming out of control, and not really thinking through her choices and making everybody else's experience about her experience.
I completely agree with you. And Heller Nicholas often points out in her monograph that Thana has adopted this very flattened essentialist view of the world in which all men deserve to die, all women are good. And like you're saying, this is a scene that troubles that decision making and immediately sets up as much as it's cathartic for someone to see a woman taking justice into her own hands or whatever, she's also a vigilante, and that inherently has limitations. And I think that there's a couple other instances we'll get to in the film where the film is deliberately demonstrating, like you're saying, that Thana is not judging clearly, and she is taking on a kind of ultimate authority that doesn't belong to her because, like you're saying, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, and at the same time, like pimps are management, so it goes back to a class, like the class analysis. So she's also it's symbolic of the struggle that she, or is likened to the struggle that she is going through at her own job. So she walks to Central Park Bethesda Fountain and is stalked by a gang of 5 men who close in on her in a circle. And it's in a very comical scene. She executes all of them with the 45. It's almost like a fantasy element, right? As Heller Nicholas says. She's picked up by a wealthy businessman who offers her money to spend time with him, and she shoots him in the crotch and kills the driver. This is like another pretty regressive scene. He's an Arab businessman, and Heller Nicholas says that he is meant to indicate the larger global crisis of cultural and class issues of misogyny, which, yes, I'm sure that that's also there. But it definitely does feel like the exoticized, racialized other, and, very like swerfy almost too.
Very what was the word?
Like swerfy, like sex work exclusive, radical feminism.
Okay.
Like it's with there's the sex work is a big theme in these scenes basically, and it's this idea that it's like inherently exploitative to women, and it's at the same time though perhaps it's highlighting worker struggle and how sex workers are laborers, and we must eliminate the the need for labor at all, or exploited labor rather.
Yeah, I do agree with you that this scene, this positioning of like a threatening Middle Eastern man with this white woman, just feels like the extension of a long-standing Hollywood trope that I think specifically depicts Middle Eastern men. And I mean, there's lots of different racist tropes in Hollywood filmmaking, but this specific one seemed like it was being invoked here. And I think it is also drawing attention to the fact that this man is extremely wealthy. I think that was a deliberate choice to include someone who is clearly a millionaire or has some form of accumulated wealth.
Yeah, he's supposed to probably be like a Saudi businessman.
Yes. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's just like inherently racist. Like, there's really no like getting around it. Yeah. I don't even know if the actor who played him is actually Arab. I didn't look it up, but I wouldn't be surprised if he wasn't.
Right. Yeah.
So the next morning, Thana scrubs her hands vigorously, and Mrs. Nasone is in her apartment, and she's cooking breakfast and listening to news reports about Thana's killing spree. It's almost like she's like hiding in plain sight. She's running. She runs some of the body parts in her fridge through a meat grinder, but she's not hiding them well. She's making them like visible. And she pays a visit to Mrs. Nasone to feed Phil some of the second rapist's remains.
It just stayed so fresh in the fridge.
Yeah. And Mrs. Nasone snoops on Thana as she departs with more bags, of one of which she stashes in the trunk of a man's car, this unsuspecting man. And yeah, she's becoming more sadistic, right? Like she's started to wear lipstick and smoke cigarettes. There's this idea too that the rape like corrupts her. She starts to become a bad girl. And when she makes the dog eat the meat, she's like, she really hates this dog.
I find myself hating him too. I'm like, get away from there. That is none of your business.
Totally. But she's also probably like seeing what she can get away with. And there's like the pleasure of like breaking these taboos. At work, Albert berates Thana for not coming back from lunch on the day she killed the photographer, stressing the negative effect it had on her coworkers, reminding her of her promise to try harder. And then he pressures her to go to the Halloween party as his date. But she kind of like smiles when he asks her, she's like, I'm going to fucking kill you. And the Thana's coworkers gather at the window to watch a woman having sex with her boss. And it's very silly. And she's like riding him very aggressively. And they're all like laughing. And they're like, it's in like plain sight. I mean, kind of like how Thana is in plain sight, right?
Yeah.
And Thana makes suggestive eye contact with Albert, like that's what's going to happen with us. And, she's learned to use her sexuality to entice her victims.
Absolutely. Like in the scene, so in her first scenes, she doesn't appear to be wearing any makeup. And she's, again, wearing these almost frumpy business casual clothes. In this scene, she's wearing like a pink turtleneck. Her hair has been styled. She still looks made up, but it's not this severe glamour that she dons when she goes on her nighttime killing sprees. It's a much more conventional feminine look. And I think that this is part of her developing sadistic impulse. She is strategically constructing her appearance to be non-threatening. She's wearing a pink turtleneck, pink blush. She's playing along with the game of acquiescing to her boss. And as you're saying, the entire time her gears are turning as to how she's going to ensnare him and enact revenge upon him.
So next scene, a homeless woman pushes a shopping cart across the street with a bag of body parts disposed by Thana on the bottom. That night in Chinatown, Thana observes a man kissing his girlfriend from a phone booth. They're two East Asian people, a young man and a young woman who are living in Chinatown. It is implied that they're both Chinese, but I don't know if the actors are Chinese. But that is like we're supposed to glean from them being in Chinatown. And the girlfriend says she has to go back to work. When he walks her back to the ice cream shop where she works, the boyfriend tries to kiss her again and she pushes him off in anger, presumably not wanting to be seen by her coworkers and bosses. Thana follows him home, decides to shoot him, and is too late, and she is visibly frustrated here. And it's kind of like Thana is this white woman, and she's kind of arrived in this non-white enclave, presumably, with the goal of stalking and killing someone. And it is, like you say here in your notes, it's the clearest instance so far in which Thana is not sound in her judgment of who she's killing. And Thana is like investing herself with too much authority.
And Heller Nicholas also has a different interpretation than what I noted here of what happens in front of the ice cream shop. She interprets that moment as this young woman playfully pushing her boyfriend away, not...
That's how I interpret it too. Yeah.
So that probably says more about me than it does about what the filmmakers intended, partly because I just relate to the experience of having a partner who attempts to infringe upon your professional boundaries.
I think also, you know, you're coming at it from Thana's point of view, because I think that's how she sees it too, is like, you know, this man is infringing on this woman's labor and sexuality, you know, maybe angry on her behalf.
Yeah, Thana is very much projecting her own predetermined viewpoint on someone who is only having a consensual, enjoyable interaction with someone he's in a relationship with.
Well, it also speaks to how rape robs you of being able to have those pleasant, playful experiences on some level.
Everything starts to feel like a threat.
Yeah, exactly. Thana, she's also wearing this like black cape with a hood, looking like the Grim Reaper. Again, Angel of Death. Thana goes to a bar and listens to a man. This is a very strange scene. She listens to a man tell his sob story about his wife leaving him for another woman, which is like so loaded. And he says in a reaction, he strangled his wife's cat. And he says when he discovers his wife's infidelity, he hid in the alley behind some garbage cans like Thana's rapist did. Outside the bar, Thana tries to shoot the man in the head at close range, but the gun doesn't fire. And he grabs the gun from Thana, turns it on himself, and shoots himself in the head, as he should. When I was watching this last night, when I was watching this last night with Tashanae, she was like, "Come on, icon, yes, rid the world of yourself." Like he fucking killed his wife's cat, and
he's clueless. He recounts it with this delighted look on his face that he killed an animal to get revenge on his wife deciding that she wanted to be with a woman.
Right. I mean, it's also so loaded, right? Because he's like killing the literal symbolism of pussy.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So this man is taking advantage of Thana's silence to unload on her. It's very typical man behavior. She uses that throughout the film. You know, people really project onto her, especially men, and she learns to weaponize her silence. And in this case, she seems to learn enough about the man, and so does the viewer, to justify killing him. But it's funny that he actually ends up killing himself. I mean, you just see like the self-loathing at the core of the misogynist.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think there's also a spitefulness in what he's doing. He clearly cannot stand the idea of a woman having any agency. He can't stand the idea of two women having a sexual relationship that doesn't involve him. And he can't stand the idea of a woman shooting him. So he has to do it himself, which is, of course, this ultimately self-defeating road to misery.
Yeah. It's, isn't that just the crux of so much misogyny? Thana returns home and hears Phil barking from Mrs. Nasoni's apartment. She takes 2 bags of body parts and leaves with them through the same window her rapist broke in through. Mr. Nasone and Phil enter the apartment because, she has no respect for her privacy. And Phil sniffs at the locked bathroom door, and Mrs. Nasone retrieves the key, but finds that Phil has knocked over and broken a vase. At work, Albert gives his employees the afternoon off to prepare for the Halloween party. Thana's coworkers are excited, but she remains motionless and deep in thought or dissociation. Back home, Thana hears Phil barking again and double checks that her bathroom door is locked. She gets permission from Mrs. Nasone to take Phil on a walk. Thana tries to dispose of him by getting him hit by a car, which doesn't work. And she ties Phil up next to the water and aims her gun at him, and then leaves Mrs. Nasone a note saying Phil ran off. So it's unclear if she shot him or not. Mm-hmm. There's also a part where Thana is standing next to the men's bathroom sign with an expression of disgust on her face.
It's a very funny shot.
Yeah. And I think this is a good opportunity to talk about American cinema's sentimentality about dogs on film. Is Thana right to shoot the dog? This is a thing that plagues me. I hate that website, Does the Dog Die? And I hate when people bring it up in my screenings. I had to make a rule about it in my server that I don't want people to bring it up. And I don't know what it is. Like, I love dogs too. I have a tiny, stupid dog. I love animals. I do. But I'm still a carnivore. I'm not like a vegan or vegetarian or anything. But
also same.
Yeah. But this is something that always bothers me because I feel like people will watch movies and not give a fuck that there's human death, but as soon as it's an animal, then it becomes a problem. It feels like covertly white supremacist to me.
It absolutely does, because there's no regard for human life. There's this idea that underlying it that people are disposable. But this animal that you have, I think people project a lot emotionally on their dogs. I don't like the way that most people interact with.
It's unhinged.
It's really crazy. It's often unhealthy for the animal.
Right.
As I was making this note, I don't know if this is too much of a tangent, but in the film Angst, which is an Austrian horror film, I think this came out a couple of years after Ms. 45. Have you seen it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There's, it's about this relentless, brutal home invasion in which an entire family is slaughtered. And there are
better than Funny Games.
So oh my God, it's such a good film. I need to rewatch it. There are repeated instances where the viewer is shown the family dog in peril. And by the end of the film, I realized that as a viewer, I think what was happening was the director was asking, do you care more about this dog than these people who are being slaughtered? Why were you so anxious about the dog when this woman was getting butchered? So I'm not sure if I have anything conclusive to say about that, but that's another instance in horror cinema where that sentimental association with animals and privileging of a dog's life over humans is, I can already feel people canceling me.
Well, then I'm canceled too, because I just said I hate that website, Does the Dog Die? I mean, yeah, there's something I never really quite, because there's also a part of me that understands it. They're innocent. It is upsetting. I just also think it's okay to be upset by things that you see in movies. I think that there's a lot of merit in being uncomfortable in art. I think it was a really bold choice to make Thana a dog killer in this movie because it disrupts our sympathies for her. It shows her as an imperfect victim. And I think part of what I resent is people getting so hung up on the animal death that they forget what it means. Like, what is it saying?
Yes.
And I think that is what really like grinds my gears about it, to be honest, is that there's so much focus on being upset about the dog that
Right.
we ignore what the director is trying to say about animal death and its
Agreed.
symbolism. I mean, like something like necromantic, right? Like the animal death in that is so highly symbolic that I think if you get too caught up in the gross out factor of it, you kind of miss what else is going on. And of course, like these directors are also trying to shock you in a way. Like there is of course that element. But I think I get annoyed when people don't realize that the director is trying to shock them. And
Right.
why don't we think about why we're so shocked by that? I think that's really my issue with it.
But yeah, essentially, I agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah, I think it's just like a pet peeve. LOL. Pun intended. And it's something that horror likes to play with, like Pet Sematary. Horror filmmakers know that people are really precious about animal death.
Mm-hmm.
So Thana now dresses up in a sexualized nun habit for the Halloween party. It's sleeveless with leg slits and thigh-high stockings with garters. She takes bullets off of her dresser and kisses them and loads them into the gun. It's like such a good scene. This is iconic. She aims the gun at the mirror and pantomimes blowing kisses and firing shots in all directions. So it's very much a reference to Taxi Driver. And the You Talking to Me scene, and it's got these other references to these vigilante films. There's the visual pun on lipstick, the bullets on the dresser as the lipstick, and also militarism and institutions present in fashion, like the beret, which I thought was
In the
really,
church. And
yeah, in the church, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love the nun outfit, right? Like
I could talk about the nun outfit.
Yes, please.
Okay, this could have just
Yeah.
been 2 hours of us talking about sexy nun
Yes, please talk to me about the nun outfit.
There is this immediate clash between Thana looking so sexy and glamorous, and sexy in a very subversive way, right? Because nuns are supposed to be virginal, celibate, brides of Christ, and exploitation cinema, of course, immediately loves to subvert that and titillate viewers with the idea of what goes on in a convent. But at the same time, Sana is like playing dress up. There is this almost, to me, it's almost like this heartbreaking reminder that this person is really young and has just started out in the world, and she has already experienced a trauma that is fracturing her mind and her relationship to reality. Not only is there a cinematic reference to Taxi Driver, I think this is also a reference to Black Narcissus, in which Sister Kathleen sort of goes, psychosexually insane and throws the habit off and puts red lipstick on. And this is an inversion of that, where Thana kind of liberates her own death drive. She dons this costume of the celibate. I think there's also, we're being asked to consider what her sexuality even is in this scene. There's been absolutely no indication given that she is interested in anybody sexually. And I think her deliberate choice to don a nun outfit for her is supposed to be a reclamation of her sexuality, or lack thereof, a preservation of what she might consider her own sexual integrity. She feels that by being raped, she has been degraded. So she is symbolically taking the vow to renew her virginity, and as a nun symbolically marries Christ, Thana is in this moment committing herself to her vigilante mission, which she has an almost religious devotion to. And I think there's also, on the theme of the nun outfit being an indication of, or a symbol of purity, the viewer is then being confronted with the question of, do you think this person is innocent or pure or blameless? And we've had plenty of evidence, like both for and against that up until this point in the film. Would you want to speak about nunsploitation? I feel like you're more familiar with that than I am. I think that's important to talk about here.
Yeah. And yeah, that's, I mean, I love everything you said about the nun as the bride of Christ. I mean, Lund also references the real bride of Christ in her essay. And she also says that when she was raped, she had agency over whether it meant anything. She says when she makes love, her vagina is a vagina, but when she was raped, it was only a hole, and that her rapist did not actually access her. And that is, it ties into this religious purity sort of ideal of, you know, it subverts it and plays into it, because there's this idea that if you're raped, you're corrupted, you're no longer a virgin. But then historically, like, women like nuns have taken back their power in, you know, saying that rape, it does not undo their virginity or their marriage to Christ. So there's also a long tradition in exploitation cinema of nunsploitation, like you mentioned, and corrupt nuns on film. The most famous of this is The Devils. And because of this, the nun has emerged as this kind of fetish figure. There's the prurient gaze on these like innocent figures. It's very ripe for sexual narratives about corruption and what happens between women when they're behind closed doors and homosocially bonding to a perverse extent. You know, they start fucking. There's symbols, icons like Benedetta, who this lesbian nun that a lot of nunsploitation is based on. And yeah, it just really plays into the nunsploitation theme of the titillation of corruption. There's also, Lund is quoted in the Helen Nicholas book, where she says the revolutionary must be a crafty Christ. And yeah, Jesus Christ is one of those figures that is a revolutionary, but has been, you know, obviously adopted for very archaic and anti-revolutionary means for millennia. But it's, yeah, there's these really powerful associations with the nun as the bride of Christ, and also Thana as a martyr figure. And I don't know if that made any sense, because we've been talking for so long. I feel like I'm like devolving into madness. But yeah, those are some of my thoughts about nunsploitation.
On the spiral. Yeah, first of all, everything you're saying, I think absolutely makes sense. I also just want to point more broadly to the usage of Catholic imagery in Ferrera's films. Driller Killer starts in a very weird way in a Catholic church. I've not seen Bad Lieutenant, but Lund wrote that, and there is a lot of Catholic imagery in that film as well, including a scene with a nun who expresses regret that she didn't kind of like alchemize her rape into anything revolutionary. So, like you're saying, this absolutely alludes back to the radical interpretation of what a Christ figure might be, and Thana is clearly taking that on. I think there's also a bit of an element of awareness of surveillance. Like, okay, if everyone's watching me, then maybe I will perform for God alone, or whatever divine authority is watching.
The first male gaze is God.
Yeah. Sorry, that hit me like a ton of bricks. Yeah, that's so true. That's why I'm so horny for religious imagery.
Yeah, I
Well,
mean,
if you're watching, I'm
yeah,
gonna put
he's
on a
always
show.
watching you. Yeah, no, I mean, it's a rich text, that nun
Uh-huh.
outfit. Let's just say that. I mean, there's also, of course, the ideas of chastity, and Thana is kind of in this like self-imposed chastity the whole
Mhm.
movie. She's like an asexual figure, like you said. And then nun fetish itself is a whole genre.
And it
So,
also is evoking her desire for a world without men, much as a nun might live in a
mm,
convent surrounded only by women. And of course, that's okay. I don't know. I don't have extensive knowledge on how convents operate, but it's still operating under the patriarchal authority of the church. So Thana is kind of operating with this skewed viewpoint that we've noted throughout
mm.
our discussion. She has this fantasy of a kind of, utopia, but the way that she is expressing it doesn't get at the truth of it.
And it's almost like, can you ever really get away from God's gaze, the patriarchal
Right.
God gaze?
Right.
Thana attends the party with Albert, who is dressed as, we think, Barnabas Collins from Dark Shadows,
Or Dracula. He's
or
dressed
Dracula.
vampirically, but it seems intentionally ambiguous.
A man in a basketball jersey tells a man dressed as a bride, more like gender fucking. He's like, you can buy a virgin in Puerto Rico for $300. So, and then a woman fights with her partner about his decision to renege on getting a vasectomy. An acquaintance of Albert's inquires about who Thana is, and he calls her one of his proteges. So there's this idea that women are surrounded by misogynist violence and callousness all the time. And there's also the indignity and ridiculousness of having these serious discussions while dressed up for a Halloween party. I mean, Halloween as a symbol too. I mean, everything converges at this Halloween party, which is part of why I wanted to talk about this movie this month. But yeah, Halloween, the symbolism of Halloween, the night when the veil is thin. What do you make of that, Annaliese?
I mean, my first thought is that Halloween culturally is this ultimate convergence of death and sexuality on the one hand,
Yes, yeah.
which is why we're goths.
Yeah, exactly. Why we love Halloween.
um, yeah, there's this morbid association with Halloween, and then it's God. I remember someone I followed on the internet saying Halloween's not about like Samhain; it's about getting drunk and fucking someone in a ghost costume, which is true in how we celebrate it in a contemporary time, I think. It's an opportunity for people both to flaunt their sexuality, to express more fetishistic desires, to cross dress. It's one of the, I think, only broadly socially acceptable times for people, particularly men, to engage in cross dressing. And on that point, the Halloween party presents an opportunity to make explicit how Thana's bioessentialist worldview is limited, which I'm sure we'll get to when we discuss the climax.
Yeah. And there's also these very like ironic, comical things going on, right? Like the man in the bride outfit talking about buying a virgin in Puerto Rico for $300. Like there's a lot. And then the couple arguing, I think he's like a skeleton, maybe.
Or something.
Yeah, and yeah, there's a lot of symbolism in the costuming, like there is with Thana's costume. And the party was apparently cast with friends of the crew, so it was like an end of shooting party, so the atmosphere is genuine.
It does look like a lot of fun, and the saxophone melody.
Okay, I'm gonna see. Can you please insert the music from this scene? So Mrs. Nasone is snooping in Thana's apartment, and the door opens, and she's startled by Thana's neighbor Ricky dressed in a gorilla suit. Mrs. Nasone finally discovers the second rapist's head in a garbage bag and screams. But meanwhile, Albert and Thana and her coworkers are dancing at the party. Laurie is wearing a white leotard with a black bow choker and a black cape. Very masculinized, right? More cross-dressing, more gender fucking. Albert takes Thana upstairs and tries to have sex with her. Back at Thana's apartment, Mrs. Nasone and Thana's neighbor are talking to the police, and Mrs. Nasone refers to Thana as a witch. She's a witch and a whore. And that's kind of interesting considering Mrs. Nasone is kind of like the typical crone witch figure. Mm-hmm. So Thana is ratted out by a woman who replaces her male animal companion temporarily with a man in an animal costume. That was your note. I thought that was really smart. So Albert lifts up Thana's habit back at the party, revealing the .45 tucked in her stocking. That is so loaded. It's, it lends itself to the phallic gun reading. It becomes the vagina dentata, but it also lends itself to a trans reading. The fear of the woman with a penis, like we were talking about, the fear of the castrating woman. Thana shoots Albert, and it goes on a slow motion rampage downstairs, killing several of the men at the party. Only the men, though. And she is confused when she sees a man dressed as a bride and hesitates, which gives Laurie the opportunity to stab her in the back with a knife. Thana screams and whirls around and aims the gun at Laurie, but doesn't shoot. And as Thana collapses and dies, she calls Laurie sister, which is extremely significant because the photographer, sleazebag, had called her sister, and also goes back to nuns as sisters.
Yeah, when Albert lifts up the habit to discover the gun tucked in Thana's stocking, I absolutely do see that. The gun now functions as both like a phallic symbol as well as a vagina dentata symbol, in my opinion. On the one hand, there is like the transpanic coded reading. And while that's not a literal moment in the film, it's undoubtable that Albert's expectation of Thana's gender performance and her body have been completely upended in this moment. And then, as much as he continually is pleased with himself throughout the film because he thinks that he's wearing her down, I imagine that in his head he's taking credit almost for the fact that she's started wearing lipstick and tight sweaters and has decided to go to the Halloween party.
Ugh.
And calls her his protege. He thinks that he's fucking shaped her.
It reminds me of someone.
Oh yeah, I wonder who that might be. But this is, of course, been her own doing, and her adoption of this gun, which was, initially coded as a phallic symbol, to me also becomes vagina dentata coded. This is her pussy. I hope that doesn't sound ridiculous, but like, this is how she has transmuted her understanding of her own body in a way that makes sense. And she has fully, literally weaponized the way that she knows men are attracted to her into a means for revenge.
Yeah.
And I think it's significant that Thana's weapon of choice is the gun for those reasons. It's one of many examples of the film where she is taking what oppresses her and mirroring it and like reshaping and recoding it. And Laurie kills her with a knife, which is probably more notoriously like phallus coded, and literally in the film it's being held at the level of Laurie's crotch.
It's crazy. Yeah.
It's like so on the nose. It's right there.
Yeah. And yeah, she's like, the .45 is like her weapon of liberation, and she murders several men with a gun, but she's also raped at gunpoint. Both
Yeah.
rapists threaten her at gunpoint, and then she's killed by a woman with a knife, which Creed and Clover, of course, would, have it that each weapon is a phallus. Knifing is regarded typically as more intimate. And yeah, it's like the intimate. I mean, it's obviously, I think, a reference to the way that women backstab each other under patriarchy, which Lund talks about a lot in her essay. She talks about like women as traitors.
Yes, which is, to me, that's complex to talk about, because I think on the one hand, when Thana says sister, it's the only word she says in the film, she is expressing this longing for solidarity that she feels doesn't exist, as though she's saying to Laurie, you're supposed to be my sister. You're supposed to be in on this with me, betraying me. And of course, textually, like you said, she's being stabbed in the back. It's evident that she is being betrayed on some level. The way that Lund interprets this is she's saying that women en masse enable their own oppression, which maybe I talked about a little when I was initially discussing her essay. So I'll say again, there's a grain of truth in that. Internalized misogyny is a thing.
For sure.
But Heller Nicholas is also pointing out that Thana's worldview is what's bringing her down, not women, not feminism, qua feminism. And this is a cry for solidarity. I think a lone vigilante cannot accomplish the things that survivors or any other group of oppressed or subjugated people can achieve together.
Right. Yeah, and it's also the first time that men have been killed in front of and among women in the movie. And they are horrified. They're not on her side because, horrible though they may be, they're still their husbands and boyfriends. And it's not something, it's almost as if to say it's not something that you can force on people. It has to be willingly given, this kind of solidarity. It's a really eerie and haunting scene. It's a direct reference to Thriller, A Cruel Picture again. It's got that very eerie, dissonant music and strobe lights and those garbled moans. I mean, Laurie is such a tomboy character. Like, she's wearing that tuxedo look. She's got her short hair, her androgynous name. And as opposed to Thana, who is very feminine in this film. And Thana is also confused by both the man dressed as a bride and Laurie's more androgynous appearance. She's not sure who to shoot. And yeah, like you said, and Heller Nicholas says, Thana is giving this very like us versus them bioessentialist worldview that leads to her downfall, not women or feminism. So Mrs. Nasone is weeping and praying in her apartment by photos of her dead husband and the presumably deceased Phil, who runs up the stairs and returns to Mrs. Nasone's apartment unharmed. And that is the final scene. It ends on like a comedic note. What do you think about the ending?
I think it functions in a few different ways. The Halloween party massacre scene is the first time that I, as a viewer, have experienced anything remotely resembling horror when I was watching this film, because every single time I've been like, yeah, good for her. But like you've pointed out, this is now happening in front of people who love and live with these men and are now being completely fucking traumatized by what Thana is doing.
Right.
So I think in one sense, the little coda at the end of the film is offering a tonal shift so that the film doesn't become entirely bleak. And it is a movie with plenty of funny moments. It is an
For sure.
intentionally comedic film. I think also there is, in the one sense, it's evidence of Thana not being entirely certain, or the word I'm looking for is,
well, it shows that she's perhaps not as monstrous as
Yes,
we've
that's
gotten
the,
to
yeah,
by the end, right? Like
right.
she couldn't
Yeah,
even kill the dog. She was like,
right,
you know, she decided against it.
right.
So it's almost like you're sad when she dies at the party, and then you're even more sad when the dog returns because you're like, no,
Right.
Thanna. Yeah.
Because she's not someone who, to go back to the idea that we've talked about before regarding like a rape survivor is damaged, she is someone who does become so she goes so far off the deep end that there is a point of no return for her. And I think in this moment, like you're saying, she is not a monster and she is not hopeless in the way that rape survivors may be depicted or may feel about themselves.
Oh my God. We picked this film clean apart. We've been talking
Meat
for
off the
2
bone.
hours and 40 minutes. This was great. This was I'm gonna assume though, because you're just going by your first name, that you don't want to plug your social media.
No, social media is fine.
Oh, okay. So where
Yeah.
can people find you on social media if you want them to?
So I'm on Instagram as Welcome to My Bridal Chamber.
So
And
good.
I'm on thank you. Yeah, clearly have some nun things of my own going on. And I'm on Twitter as Uxor, UXXXOR. I feel like my Twitter is just me reposting your screenings, which is fine by me. There's really no other use for it at this point.
This was such a great conversation, and I'm gonna release it in 2 parts, I believe. You all know where to find me. Girls Guts and Giallo. No, Girls Guts Giallo on Instagram, and on Twitter, or if you want to call it X, it's Girls Guts Giallo X. And sign up for my Patreon, where you can talk to incredible people like Annaliese, who are thinking very deeply about these concepts the way that I am on this show. And that is patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. Check it out. You can sign up for as low as $5 a month and still get access to the Discord in read-only mode. It's well worth it. This is how I make all of my money besides the occasional freelance job. It's sustained completely by this podcast and the work I do on this podcast. So if you appreciate and love the show, there is no better way to show me than signing up. If you want me to respond to any of your messages on social media, I'm definitely not going to do that if you're not part of my Patreon. So it's season of the bitch. We're closing in the ranks. So if you want me to talk to you, sign up at patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And thank you so much, Annaliese. And I'll see you in the Discord.
Thank you so much, Annie. And as a member of the Discord, I can confirm that you're going to get your money's worth. So,
oh my God, I give so much. So much. So
you do so much. Oh my God, it's incredible.
and there's just like so many, like, you, of course you're paying for the Patreon, but the amount of resources that you get, like the bang for your buck, if you are a cinephile, and especially a controversial film cinephile, like everybody there who's active is so solid and provides so many new rabbit holes to go down.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Yeah, check us out. I also forgot to mention that I have a Miss 45 tattoo of a VHS tape that says Miss 45 on my ankle.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah, so obviously talking about this is a dream come true for me. So thank you for making it happen.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about this film, Annie. This was a wonderful conversation, and I'm glad I could have it with you.